Hello and welcome to another edition of the training course, How to Train Driving Instructors. This one's about what we call the home study units. This is probably one that it really is important to the planning, etc. And I think this is one that a lot of trainees will try and skip or just do lip service to. And I think it's one that most driving instructors skip in general driving, in general teaching. Hand on heart, how many driving instructors could say that before each lesson they spend at least a few minutes planning that lesson, thinking about their student, possibly reviewing their lesson notes, planning how that lesson will go, and thinking about the route and that thing. It may only be 10 minutes, 50 minutes or so, etc. Something which I used to do quite a lot is just before park up round the corner from the pupil's house, and I just give myself some time to think about that pupil, think about what they've done, what we're going to do, what the traffic was like and the weather was like today at this moment, and anything there. Just before, of course, pulling around to go and pick up my learner. So let's move on with this lesson. And the thought that just occurred to me as well, you guys are going to be doing instructor training. This is going to be really important to you. Before you pick up your PDI, you need to get your book out, get your training book out, have a look at it, think, what unit am I doing today? What do I need to be doing? Possibly reviewing my notes, my videos before that lesson for each individual lesson. So you're planning that lesson on how it will go. So you've got it in your head what you're going to be doing. And it is about preparing the lesson. So far today, your trainees should have completed their theory test. They should probably have passed it. They've demonstrated lessons and observed a real driving lesson in manoeuvres. So they've done basically their part 2 stuff. They've demonstrated they can do turns in the road. So they know that they've got a good standard of driving. They've got a good standard of knowledge, or so they should have, because this often comes down in this stage where it falls down a bit. They might have covered lesson planning, risk management, teaching and learning, and the GDE matrix already in their theory studying and in a classroom training module. They may have at this stage. Now is the time for them to prepare. They've got to collect all that information together really and start to prepare ready for delivering lesson either to a pupil or role-playing driver trainer. There is a unit about role-playing which I'll cover later. The units are not done all at once. For example, if they've already demonstrated and observed a junction basic lesson, well, they can now prepare this lesson. They may not have done the manoeuvre lesson yet, but remembering this fits very much in with your diaries as well. If you happen to have a learner that you think, this would be a good lesson for Fred to have observed, and Fred's already demonstrated it in his part 2, then you could move on reasonably quickly with them actually preparing the lesson and then actually delivering the lesson. It's all sometimes, I wonder whether we should be doing the demonstration of the manoeuvre, for example, then we do the preparation for the manoeuvre, they do the theory for the manoeuvre, and then actually deliver the lesson all in one, or not in one, but quite close together, so it's fresh in their head. As a trainer, you get involved in these units only when the trainees are at the teaching stage, so you won't get to see this until they come to you for the delivering of the junctions lesson. So at the beginning of the junction lessons, you will see in their workbook, in the feedback development sheet, it will actually tell you now, check the preparation of these modules, check the planning, check what they're doing, particularly check their knowledge. Do check their knowledge. By this time, most of your PDIs will have discovered Facebook. and almost certainly getting on there, asking driver trainers about various things because it's easier than doing their own studying. And they get on there, and we've got to remember that 80% of what you read in social media is wrong. Okay, it's the same with any profession. I'm involved with teaching English as a foreign language. It's one of the things I do. Oh, it's wrong. I'm involved with Spanish lessons at the moment. So much of it is wrong. Visas for Spain, etc., etc. Whichever thing I'm working in, whichever thing, there is so much wrong information, and it's difficult for them to work out. But you will need to assess that they are using the driving essential skills, the highway code, and the DVSA's own standards, and to make sure that they keep on track with that. Now, there's a number of ways to do this. They're taking the knowledge from the units 1, the skill from 2 that they've delivered 2.X's, and then what they've seen in the lessons, the observational lessons, and now they're planning it all together. They've got to bring all these elements together and prepare them in some form of lesson plan. Now, I'm a huge fan of the written lesson plan or some form of plan. A plan really is what they would use on their lap, basically, or it doesn't need to be a book so much. A sheet of paper with a plan on there with all the elements, and I'll cover that in a minute. But I'm a great fan that they need to have this written down. They need to have this prepared, ready for them. Let's look at the units that they're going to be covering. So they need to have plans for a manoeuvres lesson, rural roads, urban roads. Rurals is fast roads, etc., dual carriageways and country lanes. Then your urban, which is your traffic lights, your pedestrian crossings, your towns, basic junctions, junctions advanced, could be roundabouts or things like this. And they need to have there, because they're going to be preparing these plans there. Now we know these aren't going to cover all the plans. These aren't going to cover every single lesson that they will deliver out on the road on there. If we were to cover that, we would need to see them do thousands of lessons. This is just giving them a selection of lessons, and if you can see it, now basically they can produce a plan for manoeuvres and produce a plan for junctions. They can produce plans for any lesson they want. We're just testing the skills. When I did my teacher training, this is what we were doing. We weren't tested on every single subject we would ever teach. We were asked to prepare lessons. Our lesson plans were looked at, marked, whether they contained all the major elements, and we would then just carry that through to any lesson. Today, I'm preparing lessons on, well, take this lesson here, I'm preparing on how to prepare a lesson. I have a plan for that lesson. In fact, every single one of you are looking at that plan, because my plan becomes my PowerPoint presentation. So my plan is here. I couldn't remember this off heart, so I prepare a plan. My plan's in front of me, and I'm preparing this to you now. And similarly there. But nobody taught me how to do this lesson. But I'm able to take my skills and translate them over to this. So their lesson plans will need, they can prepare their own. There's no problem with that. Way back in before 2000, I prepared my own lesson plans. But they need to include all the elements, the goals, the recap, the main points, etc. They do need to. Now I prepared mine because there really wasn't anything very good out there, so I prepared my own. But today, of course, they can use, there's many out there that are very good. Now, here we come again. I am bound to recommend my own, and the reason why I always recommend the ones that I produce is because I know they stick to the DVSA own standards. I'm noticing on social media at the moment an absolute plethora of new lesson plans coming out, and people producing planners. They're producing these planners, and yes, they look wonderfully pretty pictures, and everybody's giving their own take on the pictures and how they should be done. One of them basically has all the same pictures on one side, and you flip them over and there's a blank sheet there which you were able to use a blank marker pen and just write on there. I mean, what a disappointment if you turned up with that, you know, 10 sheets of paper, you know, for $9.99 or something. It's ridiculous. But a lot of them are written with the driving instructor's own views and own rules on them, not using the DVSA. Now, another point here is there's a huge difference between a lesson planner, okay, and lesson plans. These lesson plans that I produce, if you open up inside, it's loosely folded. You can take the plan out. So if you're delivering a lesson on roundabouts, you can take the roundabouts out and you can keep that in on your lap with you. You would use it with a lesson planner. A lesson planner is the one where you've got the notes for you and the diagrams for the learner. And my ones are turned in a way that you can sit with them on your lap and your learner can see the images. And that's used to support the teacher-student role. The lesson plan is purely for you. That's the one where you would go down one by one, each thing, making sure you've covered each of the elements. And if you want to use, like I did, a dry marker pen and tick them off as I did them through my part 3 tests, through my standards checks, you know, tick them off, you know you've covered the elements, and you're not going to be sitting at the end and oh, I forgot to do it. So this is why I pushed my own, etc. It's just a showing of an example, my sample, my plans, etc. What you've got here. Mine contain the GROW model. There's the aims and objectives lessons. This one's actually using parking in a bay. The reality of things, so it tells you how to check what you're looking for, what knowledge would they need to have, what skills would they need to have now in order to carry out this maneuver, etc. And then the options, it gives you the options. These are just prompts for you to remind yourself to talk to the learner about what options you could do, and then the way forward and getting on and doing it. There is additional material in there, things like we talk about location, so you would need to plan your location, or your PDI would need to be planning their location, and on the road, things and points that they'll be needing to check out and consider on the road, all in there. Now, a good idea is to start compiling a list of common faults, and I've already started some in the lesson plans I do, the most common ones, with some of the most common fixes. It's a good idea for trainees to start doing that, you know, just writing down a list of faults they've seen and fixes they've used, remembering that not every pupil will take to that fix. They may need to use a different one for another one. And then at the end, a prompt for you to do the debrief, what went well there. So trainees could have their plan on their lap and go through them perfectly well in their book. Okay, now just put it loosely there, keep it there. And when they finish that lesson, they pop it back into their main folder and take the next plan out for whatever lesson they're doing. I would be doing this in the early stages by literally just using off the plan. Eventually, of course, you don't need to use the plan. But let me tell you a very true story, and one which goes back to my teacher training. When I was doing teacher training, one of the final things I had to do was an assessment, FENTA assessment. It's a bit like Ofsted, because I was part of the college, etc. They had to come along. Anyway, this trainer come along, this inspector come along, and she observed one of my lessons. Now, at the time, I was doing a bit of classroom training for some theory things, and although I do other teaching, I also was driving instructor, and this person said, I would love to see one of your driving lessons if you could. I was like, oh, great, okay then. So this lady came along, this Bento inspector, she came along and she jumps in the back of my car, and she's ever so quiet during the lesson, and I gave a turn in the road lesson. Now the turn in the road lesson didn't go as well as I wanted, in the sense of the learner started to struggle and with the clutch, And I had to take the learner around the corner and do a little bit of clutch work with them. So the trainer, the assessor, never got to see the turn in the road lesson. I was a little bit worried about that because I thought, ooh, will they understand the change of the lesson plan? By the way, I need to tell you now, this is long before the DVSA got into coaching, and of course the standards check, where of course you would today fail a part 3 test or a standard check for not changing the lesson plan. So I went and changed the lesson plan, and when we got back, we dropped the pupil off, and when I met up with the assessor again, she said to me, that was a really, really fantastic lesson. She said, the student I could see was struggling, I saw you took them back. She had no knowledge of teaching driving lessons. And she said she said, you took them back, you worked with them, the pupil was engaged, it was really, really good. You know? She said, really, really, I was feeling on top of the world. I thought, wow, you know. And then she said something, she said, I haven't graded you yet, she said, because I need to see a copy of your written lesson plan. And I went, well, I don't have a written lesson plan. She said, oh, it's a necessity. I cannot grade you without seeing your written lesson plan. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I've delivered this lesson hundreds of times. I don't need a lesson plan. You know, and I'm like, I don't need one. It's in my head. You know, I don't. No, she said, well, I'm going to defer your grade until I've seen some form of lesson plan. I was absolutely fuming. I went storming off down to the principal of the college's office, my professor, and I went on this silly blah, 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 you know. Calm down, he said. I tell you what, David, he said, look, you're a very experienced teacher. He said, I want you to do me a favour. Humour me. He said, go and prepare some lesson plans for me. He said, just prepare a few. He said, and see if you believe they'll benefit your lessons. If you don't think they'll benefit their lesson, great. He said, but what I do, I'm going to meet you back in a coffee shop, he said, in a week's time. He said, if you agree, if you still got the same opinion that the lesson plans are of no benefit to you whatsoever, he said, I will be buying you the biggest slice of cake, sorry, don't rest, and a coffee. He said, but if you change your mind and you think they're useful, he said, you can buy me the cake and the coffee. And I thought, right, you're on. Following week, I go back to the coffee shop to meet him, and he's there, already sitting there with his cake and his coffee, and he just pointed and said, they're waiting for you to pay. And do you know what? He knew. I started writing the plans, and I just realised how useful they were. I realised how often on a lesson I was going off on a track and doing things differently. Points I was missing, and I was able to narrate the lesson down into the important parts. And he was right, and to this day on, I've never been without a lesson plan. A school teacher has a plan. They may not have it in front of them, but it will be somewhere ready for them to use. So lesson plans really, really important. I've already said these plans are different to the lesson planner. That's used between you and the pupil. The lesson plan is for the instructor only. It's not something that the learner needs to see or even needs to know its existence. And my ones are removable for you to use. And here's just an example of the 31 lesson planner of all the different lessons, 31 different plans it contains. And it's pretty comprehensive. Whatever plans they have, they do need to be written. You need to see them. They need to be able to support the lesson, and they've got to follow the DVSA own standards. Okay, they must follow the standards. Test them on the knowledge. A huge weak point, I've spoken about it many times, is trainees come, or even driving instructors, and their knowledge, they're using all sorts of weird stuff and facts and fables and myths and lies which they picked up from things, and they believe them to be true. Remember, as an instructor trainer doing rescue work, people would come to me, and you know, I'd say to them in role, you know, oh, how often have I got to check my mirrors? And they'd say something like, oh, every 2 seconds, every 3 seconds, every 4 seconds. Oh, right. Okay. And of course, I'd start checking them every 2 seconds. One elephant, two elephant, one elephant, two elephant. You know, he asked me what I'm doing. I'm checking them every 2 seconds. In a room of trainers, I would ask them, and they'd end up arguing over whether it was 2 seconds or 3 seconds or what. And then I would always say, well, what does the highway code say? And so often that response is met with, I don't know. Is it 3? Is it 4? And I'd say, no, it says frequently. And they'd be like, oh. And then I'd ask them, so what does frequently mean with driving? And you know, everybody would wax lyrical about frequency and the different roads and the different situation, how frequent could be more on some road. And I'm like, that's what you need. So with your learners, that's what you would do. You could say to them or get them to read the highway code and see what it says frequently, and then say, look, what does that mean? And your learners will do the same. So make sure they're using DVSA standards, driving essential skills, highway code, etc. And there is planning, I think, is so important and the key to passing. So, you know, and that's going to cover a bit later. The 17 competency series talks about the planning, about make sure you're planning the route, planning to change the route, where you would need to plan, all this. And remember, my old thing is it's all about planning, 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 and then you can be spontaneous. If you've got enough plans going behind, there will always be, even though something will happen not in the plan, there will always be part of the plan that can be used to do what it is. Well, quite a lot of information for quite a small subject, but a very, very important subject. You'll be checking them when they come to you in lessons, checking that they've done these plans, checking that they're there. Even if they come along and produce one of my bright, shiny plans, don't worry, you really need to check that their knowledge, just a few questions on their knowledge, etc. You'll soon ascertain whether or not they have the basic structure for a plan. You'll soon ascertain whether or not they're using driving essential skills or if they're just winging it and guessing. And of course, if they're winging it and guessing, on your feedback sheet, they need to go and study. So the next lesson they come and prepare for you, you know, you would expect them to be red hot on their knowledge. They don't need to go back and do the lesson. Say they were weak on their maneuvers, knowledge. You would then tell them they need to prepare for the next lesson. Maybe it's junctions, and the knowledge would be good. Then, of course, you need to go back and redo it. You don't need to see it. You just need them to demonstrate that they can prepare the correct knowledge for that lesson. That's all for now. Next week, we're going to be looking at the teaching units. But for now, it's bye. Have a great week teaching, or day, depending on how fast you're looking at these units. And I look forward to speaking on the next one. So bye-bye for now. Enjoy.